Tim Ferguson is many things. He's a Doug Anthony All-Star, a writer, a comedy teacher, an MS sufferer, a husband, a political agitator and occasional campaigner, a director, a TV star and the owner of truly spectacular hair. Maybe you grew up watching Das over and over again like I did, or maybe you've never heard of him. Either way, you're about to meet a man with a great story, and some of it is broadcastable. Tim Ferguson, hello.
Hey, Kat. And hello, ABC listeners.
Oh, nice. That's a beautiful ABC voice.
I know, it's not as deep as Richard Fiddler's, but it's fairly deep.
No one's as deep as Richard Fiedler.
No one is as deep as Richard Fiedler. That's my new T-shirt.
I want to start at the beginning with you, if I may, Tim.
You may.
Where were you born?
Born in Sydney, Australia, a little-known country at the bottom of the world where nobody of interest goes.
What did Mum and Dad do for a living?
Mum was a teacher, a high school teacher, and Dad was a war correspondent.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty sexy. He went from being a war correspondent in Vietnam and being the person who got the news out that the Tet Offensive was happening. And he ended up being David Hill's minder at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation after they'd sacked him 20 years before. So, you know, everything goes in circles in the media, so be nice to everyone.
Oh, I always am. Except for Richard Fiedler. You got to watch him.
Oh, he's a
snaky.
monster.
Snaky.
He's out of control.
Where did you go to school, Tim?
I went to 9 schools, Kat.
Wow, why?
So, because my parents kept moving, you know, from war correspondent to working at the ABC to being sacked to becoming a beef farmer and then going back to the ABC, and, you know, round and round it went. It wasn't that I was bad, it's just that I had to go to a whole bunch of schools.
Did school have anything to do with how the Doug Anthony All-Stars formed?
It may have had something to do with why it formed. Paul McDermott, who is the shortest member of the group, went to the same school for his entire education, which was, of course, a strict Marist Brothers outfit in Canberra. And I went to 9 schools, and between the two of us, we found a lot in common in the sense that neither of us thought that primary, tertiary, or whatever they do in university education was of all that much value.
Do you still believe that?
I still do. I think that most universities can really be covered if people have motivation and go to the library. I read everything that you need to read if you're going to do an arts degree because I knew people who were doing the arts degrees and I found their conversations interesting. So I read all the books. The difference with the university is you have to write down your understanding of the books. I understood the books. You know, it's not that hard. Sartre is not that hard to understand. So without having to repeat it to a lecturer, I got it.
My name's Kat Davidson. Tim Ferguson is my guest, Doug Anthony All-Star, among other things. Were the Doug Anthony All-Stars an instant overnight success, Tim Ferguson?
Now you tell me your name. Oh, look, Kat, Doug Anthony All-Stars were, we weren't a real success until about 3 years into our busking careers when we went to the Edinburgh Festival and got plucked by the producers of a show called Friday Night Live, which was kind of like the big gig, except, 30 times the size. And the next thing you know, we're on television. And we had never experienced what happens when you go on television before. All of a sudden, we're walking down the street. We were in Glasgow, and these 2 guys came up, and they knew who we were. It was the first time. They were both teenagers. They loved the band, the act. They'd never seen us live. And that was, the first moment where we realized, hang on, so people are actually watching this. And it went from there.
For those who didn't grow up with the Doug Anthony All-Stars, as I did, how would you describe the group and your creative output?
It's an ecumenical Morris dancing trio, mainly aimed at warming people's hearts through blunt metal instrument usage. Oh, you know, we sing songs, we cavort, we say things that nobody's allowed to say, but everybody's thinking, except we just happen to just take that as far as it can go. Most comedians will say what we're all thinking, and it can be a bit naughty. We do it to the point where it's illegal, and that remains our credo.
Our very own Richard Fidler worked by your side for many years and now hosts the best program on radio, Conversations.
The weather. He also does the weather.
Spectacularly, too. You've never been as fascinated by 17 degrees and fine than you have when he says it.
But he does it, and you know it's true.
Has he always been an overachiever?
Richard has always been an overachiever. He was always the business mind, the planner. It was his idea for us to go to Edinburgh. It was his idea for us to move to Melbourne in the first place. Richard's very much a person who makes things happen.
I met you, I'm sure you remember, roughly 100 years ago, Tim Ferguson.
It was 112.
You were performing at the Rialto in Brisbane and you were signing autographs afterward. I would have been maybe 16, maybe. And you told me a story about how Paul Keating met his wife on an airplane. And I have to admit, although the story was fascinating, I was more fascinated by the fact that this person who I had seen through the television was speaking directly at my face. And I was quite overwhelmed. Have you ever had that yourself, given that you are massively famous? Have you met someone who has taken your breath away due to their fame and importance?
Well, firstly, I tell the Paul Keating story to everybody.
Oh, stop
it's so romantic. Because she was a stewardess and he was flying, and it was just so romantic. Secondly, working with Tom Jones actually silenced me and Paul and Richard. We didn't have anything to say. We ended up sharing a Winnebago when we were shooting the series Viva in London. And there we are. We're sharing a Winnebago with Tom Jones. It was us trying to be cool in front of a man who, did shows with Elvis. It would have really made a very funny half hour of reality television.
Now, I want to talk about your writing in just a moment, but I do want to ask the tricky question. Why did the Doug Anthony All-Stars originally break up?
Well, we did, in a very original fashion. Well, there were all sorts of pressures on me in particular. I had young children and the guys didn't, and that was very difficult to maintain a life with, little babies and touring the world as we were. And also I had this health niggle which had reared its shark fin a couple of times quite severely. And so there were voices around me advising me, and medical voices saying, you can't continue this kind of lifestyle. I'd ignored those voices for quite a while, but it just reached a point where, I couldn't continue that lifestyle. And it broke my heart. But, sometimes you've got to, do what you got to do. And that was a dreadful thing I had to do.
When did you first see signs that you weren't well?
Oh, well, from when I was about 18 or 19, I'd always get these weird little things going wrong. The most pronounced was when my eyes went funny. They were just a little bit out of whack. And I could see, but they were just out of alignment. I went to a doctor and said, my eyes are a little bit out of alignment. And he said, yes. And so that was very helpful. Doctors, they don't teach them everything, do they? It really is just university. And so I forgot about it. And I'd get buzzing and ringing and tingling and zapping and burning, like where you feel like you're actually on fire burning, as opposed to, just burning. And I didn't realize they were all connected. and they were connected because I'm good looking.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. But of course, it was, wait for it, listeners, multiple sclerosis. Why stop at one?
When were you diagnosed?
Well, actually, it took a long time. Diagnosing MS is very tricky because it is a multi-headed hydra. So the neurologists have to be very careful before they tick the MS box because, you know, if you're experiencing burning, it could be any number of neurological or even physical problems. You know, if your eyes are going wacky, maybe there's something wrong with your eyes. So it took them about 18 months of poking and prodding and waiting before they finally made the call, which was actually quite a relief. After all the confusion and everybody panicking and all that stuff, it was kind of nice just to find, it's got a name, therefore it can be fixed.
Can it be fixed?
Of course, no, it can't be fixed. But, you know, it's certainly something that can be dealt with. The drugs they have for MS really just try to keep it at bay. So they can't cure it. You can't cover the nerves in your brain with new rubber tubing known as myelin. The stuff doesn't grow back by itself through prodding. But it's, I don't know, it's a bit like taking vitamin C. Helps you keep the cold away.
It stopped you touring when you were younger, and yet now here you are on the road. What's changed, Tim?
Well, I grew a brain. What I should have done, even though when I was in the All-Stars, I didn't know about it was MS, but what I should have done is, you know, just slowed down a bit and said, you know, whatever it is, we can work with it. It took me a long time once I was diagnosed. It took me a decade before I told anybody. Even Paul and Richard were both in the dark for quite a bit of that time. They were the first ones that I did actually come out and tell. And the reason is because it's invisible. And so why freak everybody out was my thinking. A lot of people who have MS don't tell anybody because, you know, they get through their day. Nobody knows that they may be experiencing one symptom or another. So I kept it to myself. But eventually I'm walking around with a walking stick and I got sick and tired of, you know, particularly Australians who, even without saying hello, will say, what are you with the stick, mate? What's you the stick for? How come you ain't got a stick? So I just got sick of that. So the best way to stop the conversation was to say, I have multiple sclerosis, because that shuts people up real quick.
Do you get tired of, I mean, your body of work is astonishing. You're a writer, you're a director, your comedy work's incredible. You've trained people to do stand-up comedy as well as screenwriting, but often the talk, when people talk of and with you, turns to MS. Does that annoy you?
Oh, no, it gets off pretty quick when people see that it's the least interesting thing about me. It's like, you know, I get around in a wheelchair now just because, you know, nobody likes falling over. But, yeah, once people realise that I'm okay, whatever is wrong with me, I'm, you know, keeping it to myself and dealing with it, people get off the topic pretty quickly. It really is, you know, as anybody with MS will tell you, it's, you know, it's not that interesting. It's just a thing that nobody understands that has no cure. And that's like ghosts. You know, talking about ghosts is only interesting. It's like talking about cats. I've got a 90-second rule. When people start talking about their cat, they've got 90 seconds and then it's over.
Oh, no. But mine's so cute, Tim.
Yeah, I know he's so cute. You've got 90 seconds.
Tim Ferguson is my guest. My name's Kat Davidson. This is ABC Local Radio Queensland. Let's get off that boring topic and talk about your writing for a bit, if we may, Mr. Ferguson.
We certainly may. Stand by, listeners. Stand by. Pull over if you're driving.
You wrote Left, Right and Centre, which is subtitled, rather cunningly, A Tale of Greed, Sex and Power. It was released in 1997. It's a story, for those who've not had the experience, of Luther Langbein, who is a very rich man with an unhealthy amount of power and a love for nuclear energy. Is it based on anyone in particular, Tim?
Well, it was quite a prescient book, as it turned out. Everything that I wrote as a joke in this satirical novel has pretty well come true, apart from Peter Costello becoming Prime Minister. But certainly Clive Palmer is the next best thing to Luther Langbein. It's remarkably easy to predict Australian politics because they can't go very far.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, there's nowhere for them to go. Look at Malcolm Turnbull. He's gone back to trains. They all go back to trains. We're going to build a super fast train. Super fast train. And somebody said, how much is that going to cost? And the answer was, it's going to cost exactly between 60 billion and 114 billion.
Exactly.
It's great. At last we're getting some real numbers. But every Australian Prime Minister has gone to trains. Every Prime Minister goes to Badgery Creek Airport. And every Prime Minister has to deal with, at some stage, the idea of where we're going to put all the spent uranium.
You have run for office yourself, not for that office in particular, but for office.
Twice.
What was the thought behind that? Were you hoping to change the face of Australian politics?
Well, it is, show business for ugly people. Until Natasha Stott-Despoja stepped in, the politics was just a wasteland. You'd switch it on, and it was just like, what? Just will someone let Natasha talk? But yes, I do have plans for this broad brown land, and it is my eventual plan to retire into Parliament.
Since publishing the screenwriter manual, The Cheeky Monkey, Writing Narrative Comedy, you've declared your intention to tear Australia's screenwriting culture to the ground and rebuild it. You said, Tim Ferguson, our writers keep writing sexless, suicidal smack dramas nobody wants. A story must lift us up before it drops us down. The sermonising squalor that is Aussie film must and will change. What did you mean?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I could say it in another language. Das ist ein kleiner gemeinschaftliches Lügenhaus. I'm screenwriting. I was mainly saying that to the young screenwriters who I teach. I teach at New York University these days, and there's the same stuff that comes up, which is, to a young person, there is a great hunger to change the world, to right the wrongs that they're witnessing. And so a lot of their writing will be ponderous and dark and often, be shot very slow, and not have any light. Whereas real drama has two masks. One is weeping and the other one's laughing. And if you don't have both, then you're not writing drama. You're just writing a long sort of fictional lecture. So I mainly said that to shake up the young writers that I'm working with, because otherwise what they end up with is no audience, because it's a very rare person who wants to spend $20 or half an hour or anything on being made more miserable. And no matter how dark the subject matter is, humour and levity is a great way to deal with it, because it places the writer and the audience above the thing that's dark and scary and sad. Even Schindler's List has jokes and ironies.
Do you think that's a particularly Australian view of the world, or is that a human view?
No, it's a human view. I've got the same thing with New York students. Young people want to shake the world up, and sometimes they think that the best way to do that is just to show a depiction of the imbalance, whereas really to be productive, you want to show a depiction of the imbalance, but you want to show some kind of solution if you can. And that can only come by having more than one shade. Because any poem that's just got black, my life is a kaleidoscope of nothing, that's teenage poetry.
Yes.
And it's adult writing, and it's an adult screenwriting culture that has light and shade, up and down. A film like Lantana is tremendous because it's about stuff that's very dark, very scary. It's about murder and relationships falling apart. But there are moments of great jokes. You need that stuff. Otherwise, nobody's going to go.
In your youth, you sang songs about loving dogs very much, about bleeding hippies, about communist Christians, and many other things that are thoroughly unbroadcastable at this time on a Saturday morning. Has age mellowed you? Is your current show all puppies and kittens, Tim Ferguson?
Cat, we're worse. We are worse. The Doug Anthony All-Stars are out of control because back then when we were saying, oh no, ooh, hippies, ooh, you know, we just wanted to look like we didn't care. But of course we cared. You know, we wanted everybody to like us. But now that we're as old as we are, we actually do not care. Death approaches and, you know, we're just thinking ahead to the time when we won't be alive to care. So our material is far more caustic, far more confrontational, and really quite abrupt. There's no softening up. It's still funny, but we're talking about new things that no other comedians are talking about because, well, they're not worried about them yet.
Paul Flacco Livingston is your third. You still have your good self and Paul McDermott, but Richard Fidler is very busy creating conversations. What's it like working with a different guitarist?
Well, one thing is Paul Livingston didn't tell me that his first career was as a concert guitarist. When he told me that, I laughed and said, yeah, that's very funny. But can you play guitar? Can you really? He's a consummate guitarist. His playing is beautiful and has added a lot in terms of musicality to the new songs that we're performing. And of course, the great thing about Paul Livingston is he's Flacco. Flacco introduces the show and then leaves the stage and then comes back as the guitarist of the show, whereupon he doesn't speak. We're using Harpo Marx as our model for Paul Livingston, and it works beautifully because he's just got that beautiful, delicate face, and of course, it makes him very hard for McDermott to control. You know, short men control. All I have to say is Sudetenland. You know what I'm talking about.
I think you're in a dark place if Paul McDermott has the keys to you.
That's right. That's right. It is a dark place, and that's because of the mask over your head. The themes that we're dealing with, because Paul Livingston now got his pensioner card a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, my.
The stuff that we're dealing with is about not just aging, but it's about the mad scrabble for achievement and closure before death. Let's not kid ourselves, listener. Look down, look at your hand, see how it's more wrinkled than it was before, see how your spine is slowly shriveling. Death approaches. And what this means, Kat, is that we're playing with the most frightening thing in human existence, which is the gaping nothingness. And fear and laughter go together like cheese and crackers.